Prayer. Our Father in heaven, we come before your throne knowing that you certainly are a good and gracious God. You have been more than merciful to your creation, particularly to humanity, because we have just gone so far astray in so many ways, Lord, whether it's the false religions in the world, whether it's the cults and the false teachers that call themselves Christians, um, whether it's atheism or secularism, materialism. We have, as a human race, for the most part, we have turned away and rebelled against you and against um, your righteousness and your holiness. Thank you for being merciful and gracious. Thank you for the saving power of the gospel of Jesus Christ and for the new life that comes by faith in Jesus Christ, empowered by your Spirit, as you have called us to be your children, sons of the Most High God. And so we give you praise and thanks for that, even as we look at those religions that would challenge the true faith in Jesus Christ. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so last week we talked about a lot of these false cults that were part of Christianity. The Jehovah's Witnesses that have their own New World Translation based on the King James Version of the Bible, but retranslated to fit their theology, started by Charles Taze Russell back in the 1800s, and it has grown into a major worldwide religion that denies the deity of Jesus Christ, and similar to the Gnostic teachings of the second and third centuries. And then we talked a little bit about the Church of the Latter-day Saints, otherwise known as Mormonism, which is based in Utah, and they have again they claim the King James Version of the Bible, but they all have the Book of Mormon and three other documents. It was started by Joseph Smith. At his death, it's then divided into two different groups. The main group going out to Utah. The second group organized under Joseph Smith III. It's the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and that's in St. Louis. And they tried and at first had a bit of success sending missionaries out to Utah to try to win the main group of Mormons to a pulled away from Young, the guy who took over after Joseph Smith died, and they first had some significant success, but once polygamy, which was part of the early Mormon teaching, once that was put away, they had much less success. So there's still about 200,000 that are part of the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And in somewhere in the 1940s or thereabouts, they actually shifted their teaching. Some people might even consider them, part of the more Christian thing, sort of like some of the Seventh-day Adventists are seen as Christian, while others are not. Other parts of the Seventh-day Adventists. So there's been a shift in the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but not the original, not the one from Utah. That's pure Mormonism, which basically says that we're all gods, and we all have the potential, at least, for becoming gods of other worlds. Wouldn't you like that, Matt, to be the god of some world, out there somewhere? Yeah. You make it whatever you want it to be. So, yeah, no, I can't manage my own life, much less managing the lives of other people. That's kind of crazy. Anyway, so that's the Church of Latter-day Saints, or Mormonism, as it's known, and the Book of Mormon, and the other documents by Joseph Smith. Christian Science, we really didn't talk about that last week. But Christian Science, started by Mary Ann Morse Baker Eddy, better known as Mary Ann Eddy, and her writings that it basically says that pretty much all of life is imagined. It's so sickness, any kind of bodily infirmities at all, most of the things, and really it's sort of like Eastern mysticism, or parts of Eastern mysticism that say that life in this world is really just like a projection of the great being out there somewhere. So you're not real, even if I punch you in the nose and you get a bloody nose, it's not real. I'm being a little bit facetious, but that's pretty much what Christian Science says. So all you have to do if you're sick is just know that it's imaginary, and it'll go away eventually. There's Scientology. Again, we didn't talk about that last time. Ron L. Hubbard, who was a science fiction writer and sort of based his Scientology on the science fiction. It was kind of fading away in the 1980s. It was kind of dying out, and then a few of the entertainers became part of it, and all of a sudden it's kind of growing again. But it really sounds like science fiction when you read its materials. It's like people actually go for this stuff, but they do. Okay, so there are lots of different quote Christian cults that are out there. This is an older book by Walter Martin. It's called The Kingdom of the Cults, and he goes into great detail on a lot of these different cults that are out there, as well as he does touch on some of the other religions, but it's mostly about the various cults. And I mean, he did tremendous research on it. He actually went and interviewed leaders, read the materials, all of that. So again, it's dated. Not. I mean, 92. That was the 46th printing. That's the copy I have. It might have had some printing since then. All right, so today what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the competing religions in the world. Now, I'm not an expert on these at all. I know some about them, but don't come to me and say, "Well, tell me all there is to know about Hinduism, all there is to know about Buddhism, or those kind of things." I can give you the basics, and then we can go from there. All right. So we're going to start with Hinduism. Now, Hinduism actually has a number of different books or writings. Hinduism is the oldest religion in the world. It dates back 5,000 years. Okay, so it's by far older than even Judaism, which basically dates back to creation, but starting with Moses and his writings, or Job. I would consider Job to be the oldest book, written somewhere around 2000 BC. So that's 4,000 years old if you count that. So it predates any of the biblical writings by 1,000 years. However, over those 5,000 years, it has morphed and changed depending on which country has picked it up. Something like 80% of the people in India follow Hinduism. Okay, it is the third largest religion in the world, first being Christianity, second being Islam, and then Hinduism, which has somewhere just under 1 billion people. Most of them in India, but in other, Sri Lanka has them, and other places where Hinduism is a part of it. And interestingly, Hinduism is supposed to be a very peaceful religion. It's basically based on a series of ideals, and a lot of those ideals are kindness and goodness and family and those kind of things. But in recent years, especially in India, Hinduism has become a much more violent religion because of the threat of Christianity and of Islam in terms of the people in India converting. And so now they riot, they burn churches, they'll chase people out of their towns, Christians, missionaries, and all out of their towns and their communities. So they're not really following their philosophies very well. This is the Rig Veda, which is one of the most followed of the books. There's actually a variety. I mean, there's probably close to 8 or 10 different materials that are part of Hinduism. You can't really define Hinduism any better than you can define Christianity. Okay, what kind of Christianity are we talking about? Are we talking Roman Catholic? Are we talking about Orthodox? Are we talking about Russian Orthodox? Are we talking about the Coptics? Are we talking about the Armenians? Are we talking about Protestants? Well, what form of Protestantism? Each group has its own interpretation of their the scriptures and teachings and all of those kind of things, right? So it's very hard in Christianity. Somebody, are you a Christian? Yeah, I'm a Christian. What kind of Christian? Okay. Well, the same thing within Hinduism. Hinduism is not a monolithic religion. Okay, so depending on which country you come from, or even which part of a country you come from, as to which group of teachings you follow. For instance, in some of them, they're monotheistic. In other words, they believe in all is one and one is all. There's really only one divine being of sorts, but there are lots of representations of that divine being in the world. Okay, there are others parts of it that say that there are 3 divine beings or 3 groupings of divine beings, and then there's 33 in another teaching, and then in another 33 million, and in another 330 million gods. The basic teaching is that every human being is born, in a sense, with 2 spirits, 2 forms of divine. One is good and one is bad, and so if what we might call angels and demons, okay, but every human being, so you see the commercials, where you got a demon on one shoulder and you got an angel on the other, and they're trying to talk you into things. Well, that's the belief of Hinduism. Hinduism believes that every human being is born with those 2 aspects or or two spirits within them that fight for control. And so, the goal is obviously to at least keep them neutral or to kind of, move towards the good. And that's what the teaching is designed to do, is to hopefully help you move away from the evil side and more towards the good. And they have, names for those spirit beings as well. So some consider them gods, some consider them just, sort of spirits of some form or some kind. All right. Hindu teaching and philosophy has had a profound impact not only on Hinduism, but on many of the Eastern religions. In other words, Buddhism has been affected. It has its own teachings, but it has been affected by the Hindu teachings. Confucianism has been affected by it as well. It is a faith. That is, it's a religion of its own, but it's also just a way of life, a way of viewing things. So you hear in China the yin and the yang. It's the same principle. If something good happens, something bad is going to happen. To keep life in balance in the world, for every birth there's a death, or every vice versa. Okay, well, again, that comes out of Hinduism, even as it affects these other religions and their world views. All right. Basically, it supposedly upholds the principles of virtue and true living, whether you're living in India or whether you're living as a Hindu in another culture. You're supposed to be, again, always seeking to put down the negative side of you, lift up the virtuous side of you, and we would say be a better citizen. Okay, just be a better person. It sounds a little bit like Christianity, doesn't it? In that is our goal as well. Only we do it, we say, through the power of the Holy Spirit, who is at work in us to conform us to the image of Jesus Christ. There, all right. So Hinduism, the history of Hinduism is intertwined with history, especially the history of Asia and its development. And as I said, about 80% of the Indian population is regarded as being Hindu. All right. So again, this is the Rig Veda. It's just one of a number of their books. This is probably the most popular, though. This is probably the most popular religious group. We would say, in a sense, the people that follow Rig Veda would be sort of like, numerically, like the Catholics. Not that their religion is the same as Catholicism, but in terms of Christianity, Catholicism is the majority. All right. So those that follow the Rig Veda teaching within Hinduism would be the most populous of the various groups there. Don't ask me any more questions about Hinduism. I mean, I know a little bit more about it, but and the question might be, have I ever read it? I've read portions of the Rig Veda, but it's not an easy read because it's sort of like the Psalms. It's written in verse. Okay, now it was originally oral, and then oral teachings passed on over centuries, millennia. Probably the first known writings were about 600 A.D., where the writings were actually written down. So you're talking 1600 years after Hinduism started, and then it's developed. And again, depending on the country, as to how it's developed and where it's gone in terms of those various writings. Much simpler, in a sense, is the Buddhist. This is the Dhammapada, and it's pretty much most of the teaching of Buddha. All right. Now, as I said, with Hinduism, there was no. I mean, there was a sort of a guy who started Hinduism, but it's just expanded on its own. He was just a normal individual. Well, the same thing is true of Buddha. Buddha never claimed to be a god. He never claimed to be anything more than just an individual who had what he thought was good teachings to to guide human life, right? Affected by Hinduism, but he expands on it and develops his own philosophy of life. Okay, so again, depending on even in Hinduism, whether you follow the idea of all is one, one is all, that is, there's only really one God, and everything else is just reflections of that God, or whether you believe there's 330 million, gods out there, and how they all fit together and work together. Pretty much every aspect of life in it, within Hinduism has some kind of a God or spirit attached to it, and that means every part of your body, including your organs and all all of those are controlled by these spirits or these beings or whatever, and then all materialism, all things in the material realm, and then there are other universes out there as well. Okay, so this idea of the multiverse is not something new. It's been around for ages there. Okay, so Buddhism started around 500 BC. Okay, so it was started by Siddhartha Gautama, and he was like a prince. Okay, and he believed as he interacted with the people, he looked at his life and he said, basically, I'm living a sheltered life. As he goes out and he meets people that are sick, he meets people that are injured, he meets people that are poor, and so he starts looking at at all of that, and so he left the palace, and when he left this palace, he says he saw 4 sights. Okay, the first was a sick man, the second was an old man, the third was a dead man, and the fourth was a monk. All right, and this affected his perspective of life. The sight of the monk told Siddhartha to leave his life as a prince, become a wandering holy man, become a monk, in essence, and to start seeking, answers to the question: what is life? What is this existence that we have? What causes suffering in the world? Right, and so he spent many years praying, meditating, fasting, and during that period of time, he began to build up his way of life, his way of thinking about how life should work. All right, and then he began to put all of that together, and he ended up becoming a holy man, sitting under a particular poplar fig tree that people would then come to him. And so it slowly, he built up a reputation of being a teacher, an instructor, and so they would come to him. And as he sat under that tree, he began to come to the conclusion that the goal of life, no matter whether you are the dead man or the sick man or the poor man or the old man or whatever, the goal of life was nirvana. Now, what is nirvana? Well, for us, nirvana is heaven, right? It's the new heavens and the new earth, right? But for the Buddhist, nirvana is in a sense, the disappearance of life, the fading away of who you are, so that you, if you're familiar with Star Wars, okay, well, Star Wars has this idea of this life power that exists in everything living. Okay, and you know, you can draw from that life power and become more powerful yourself. And when you die, if you are, you know, a good person, when you die, you add your life force to that. Well, in a sense, that's what nirvana is. Nirvana is coming to the place where your material uh, being no longer has any hold on you, which is why they can lie on a bed of nails. They can, you know, walk over hot coals. You know, these Buddhist monks, you know, they can do all those kind of things, and you know, eventually torch themselves, light themselves, you know, on fire, and because their goal is to reach nirvana, to let go of this physical being, and you know, have your essence, you know, back into the all, right? For those that are taking my course on Gnosticism in the early church, you know, that's sort of the Gnostic view as well. All right, so the goal is to become so enlightened in this world that you realize that the material world is it's a figment of your imagination as well. You know, and so you just want to be absorbed back into the one, into the whole, and that comes through a series of steps. There's a seven-fold steps that you work through, and of course, you know, when you reach the top one, then you know the material of your body no longer really holds, you know, holds on to you. Okay, so the sevenfold path leads you on into what we would call eternity. So in some ways, you know, from our Western perspective, we would call it pantheism. Okay, that you know, all is God. You know, all the material world, but ultimately, it's not pantheism, because pantheism does believe that the sun is divine and the moon is divine, and you know, all that. But those are all projections of the one. So again, there's an effect of Hinduism that's there as you know, on that, but it's taken to the next level within Buddhism. Buddhism is the fourth largest religion in the world, with about 450 million adherents to Buddhism, mostly again in Asia, though they've begun to export Buddhism, you know, to the Western world as well. And since Buddhism, in a sense, is easier to understand than Hinduism, you'll find more quote converts to Buddhism in the United States and in the Western world than you would Hinduism, because Hinduism is really very, very complex. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, and as Peter is saying, it is like every religion. You have misunderstandings or various understandings, but you're talking about the ancestor worship that comes out of Confucianism, which has affected Buddhism and somewhat Hinduism, but more Buddhism. So yes. So in that Asian culture, there's a commingling of all these groups. Hinduism has affected Buddhism. Confucianism has infected or affected both of those, and especially in this concept of ancestor worship, which comes out of Confucianism, but has infiltrated into Buddhism, and becomes especially in the Asian culture has become part of the Buddhism. Yeah. Yes, but as I said about Christianity, Christianity is very confusing as well, because we've done the same thing, and so this is also a lot of it's in verse. It's the gathered teaching, most of which was written down after um, Siddhartha, after his life, and that's true of almost every religion. Um, think of Christianity. Jesus didn't write any thing. That the apostles wrote what Jesus said, right? So the in the early Judaism, most of that was written down right from the start by Moses and all. But in terms of most of the religions of the world, they started as just the teachings of a wise person, and then wrote it down. For instance, Muhammad couldn't read or write, so nothing is the writings of Muhammad. It's all stuff that people had either written down, from his teachings, or they said that Muhammad said. Okay, so as long as we're talking about that, then let's go to Islam. I know quite a bit more about Islam than I do about the other religions, simply because I've taught it. Well, not taught Islam, but taught about Islam. Um, but I had a Muslim came, and we had a discussion about Islam. Came here to the church, and so we had a discussion about it. And I said, "Oh yeah, I have a copy of the Quran." Okay, so I brought this out, and he was like, "That's not the Quran." I'm like, "Okay." He said, "I'll bring you a copy of the Quran," and so he did. All right. So what's the difference? Well, the difference would be the difference of a paraphrase of the Bible and a more literal translation of the Bible. Now, neither of these is the Quran, because technically, until the last 50 years, you are not allowed to translate the Quran. All right, it had to be in Arabic. You had to learn Arabic, and you had to read the Quran in, the Arabic writings. So these are translations. Okay, this is supposedly a more accurate translation. This one actually says a contemporary translation there. All right. So I have read much more of the Quran than I have any of those other writings. I tend to like the contemporary one. It's easier to read and understand there. Okay, now, Islam, like all these other religions, Islam has multiple branches. We are most familiar with the Sunni and the Shia. All right, the Shia it tends to be more what we think of as the fundamentalist movement of Islam. The Sunni tends to be tends towards secularism more. Not that they're necessarily secular, but most of the countries that we think thought of prior to the Persian Wars as being sort of more secular, like Iraq, Egypt, even Saudi Arabia. All right, Saudi Arabia is anything but secular, because I mean you're not allowed to have a Bible in Saudi Arabia because it's the holy ground. The whole country is the holy ground. Christians have to be very careful. When we had soldiers for the first Iraq War, the Kuwait thing, when our soldiers were there, they were told they could not have services, and they could not, have openly have Bibles in Saudi Arabia. Okay, so the Filipinos, which Christian Filipinos tend to work in the oil rigs and stuff in Saudi Arabia, and they're constantly being kicked out because they're much more open with their Christianity. We as Americans, we tend to try to fit in. They're much more open, and so they come in. 6 months later, they're kicked out because they're holding Bible studies or doing whatever. Okay, so anyway, the founder of Islam is Muhammad. Now, I'm going to give you the Christianized version of Islam. That is what we would consider, maybe not even the Christianized, the Western perspective of Muhammad. Because and much of this is in the Quran. That's how you interpret it. Muhammad, his parents died, so he was raised pretty much by his uncle, and his uncle was a merchant, and so he traveled with the camel trains and whatever. Okay, so most of what Muhammad gained in terms of his understanding of Judaism and Christianity was from sitting around these, the fires, at some oasis or at some place. The merchants would be interacting with other merchants and from other places. So a lot of what he learned about the Old Testament scriptures and Christianity came from that kind of thing. So think of it this way: how much of Christianity could you get if you went to the local bar? Okay, people would share. They would talk about it. Oh yeah, I'm a Christian. I'm a Catholic. I'm a this. I'm a that. But how much of the truth of what it really was? Or, as Peter just said about Buddhism, there's all this intermixing of, different philosophies, different ways of life into what supposedly is Christianity or supposedly is Judaism. Okay, so that's kind of, he picked all that up. Now remember, he couldn't read or write. Well, most of the merchants and people of those days, everything was done by bartering. Okay, so you didn't have to have a great understanding of mathematics or things. You just had to have an understanding of what is this product worth. Yeah. So, but in the Quran, basically, it tells us that he had, he didn't read or write, and therefore he didn't write down anything. Um, no. Well, the final, because once he died, they started collecting the materials, and again, the two branches, those two major branches, were the difference between the caliph, who was his sort of right hand man, and his son. Okay, and so the son is the Shia, and this other guy was the head of eventually the Sunni movement. Okay, so the difference between the two is how the Quran is interpreted. Okay, so the rule in the Quran, in interpreting the Quran, is whatever Muhammad said as he advanced in his age and in his work, that has more authority than the things that came before. We would say it's sort of like the difference between the New Testament and the Old Testament. Okay, the Old Testament, we interpret the Old Testament through the New Testament. Okay, well, that would be in a sense. So there are contradictions, and they don't question that there are contradictions in the Quran, but the things that are later have more authority than the things that he said and that were collected earlier. So, for instance, in the early part of his life, the Jews and Christians were the people of the book. Okay, so they were positive. But after he started conquering, Saudi Arabia, then at the end of his life, he said, kill the infidels, kill the Christians, kill the Jews. So depending then on which of those you take as being more authoritative, okay, so the Sunnis tend to be less aggressive towards others. They still protect their religion, but they're less aggressive. The Shias, on the other hand, hold to his deathbed statement, which was, kill the Christians, kill the Jews, kill the infidels. Okay, so that's the basis of the Quran and how it's organized. All right, so it's organized in different sections. Those sections, being regular life, religious life, and different aspects of life. So what his teachings were on those different things, sort of, again, the Psalms and Proverbs. The wisdom writing is very different from the historical writing, very different from the prophets, very different from the law, Gospels, etc. Okay, so they have different segments within the Quran. As Peter said, eventually, over about 100 years, they collected, organized, and then established the Quran. All right, so that's their sacred writing, and that's what guides how they live, how they interact with people, and all those kind of things. So there are 5 pillars. Okay, first one is Shahada. Shahada is testifying that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is the final messenger of God. Okay, so they respect the former prophets. They respect Abraham, and Moses, and Jesus, and some of the other prophets of Christianity. They respect them, but they say that over the years their teachings have been twisted, so that it wasn't Isaac. The Jews changed things. It was Ishmael who was the descendant of Abraham, and of Abraham's teachings, and on that way. Jesus is mentioned far more times in the Quran than Muhammad himself. Okay, he is considered the highest teacher other than Muhammad. All right. Of course, he's not God, though there are some inclusions of some of the miracles and some of the things that Jesus did from the New Testament. All right. So there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the final prophet or final messenger of God. The Salat is the 5 daily prayer times that every true Muslim will stop in the middle of their day, and they will, pull out their prayer rug, and they will pray towards Saudi Arabia. Then there's the zakat. The zakat is donating an obligatory amount of charity. So it's specified what you are to give for the support of the local mosque and worldwide propagation. Okay. The interesting thing about that is that you did not that after the initial movement of Islam in the 700s into the 800s, where they took over pretty much the Middle East and all of North Africa and about half of Spain. Okay, and so that was a very rapid. Within 100 years, they had pretty much wiped out Christianity in North Africa. North Africa is above the Sahara. All right. So in the Middle East, so until the 1400s, the mid 1400s, the Byzantine Empire, which is the Greek empire, continued to hold the western part of Turkey, and of course Greece. But eventually the Byzantine Empire in the mid 1400s collapsed, and so Turkey then became a part. And several times during that period of time, the different tribes were in control, but they were all Muslim, and they threatened Rome a couple times. They tried to get north into Spain, from Spain into France, and they were soundly defeated there. So eventually they were driven out of Spain under Isabel and Ferdinand. They were driven out of Spain, but remained along North Africa, Middle East, and then started spreading eastward. So, for instance, Indonesia has the largest Islamic population of any nation in the world, including, because they're smaller nations throughout the Middle East. Yeah. And there was major war not that long ago there in Indonesia between the Christian islands and the Islamic government. Okay, so that's the zakat. What I was starting to say was, they had the mandatory giving. Also, when Islam spread initially, and they would conquer a town or a country, basically you had one of 3 choices. You either convert to Islam. Now, if you convert to Islam, you get all the benefits of Islam. Okay, so you're on equal par with any other Muslim if you convert. The second was you can be killed. And the third was you would pay an exorbitant tax, which again, it's part of the zakat. That's kind of how, when they conquered, they gained, a great deal of funding. And what's tragic is that the vast majority of the Christians, both in the Middle East and across North Africa, converted to Islam, which tells you about the state of Christianity in the 700s. It was pretty much just that I'm a Christian because I'm born in this country, rather than because I believe it. There were 440 what we would call bishoprics or sees, S-E-E-S, in across North Africa before Islam swept across. At the end of that 100-year march across North Africa, there were 4. So from 440 to 4. All right. Anyway, the zakat. Today, Islam is spreading faster than it ever has. And the reason? Oil. Where those countries were impoverished during, which is why they were conquered by the British and the French and the Dutch, because they didn't have much money. With oil, they now are just filled with finances, and so they're exporting their religions all over. You hear the discussions about Iran and how under Trump, Iran was almost bankrupt, and then under Biden, the $700 billion was freed up, and that it's the oil that has caused this rapid expansion, because they will go into a community, a poor community. They will build hospitals. They will dig wells. But the only people that can use those hospitals, the only people who can use those wells, are people who convert to Islam. Where Christianity will go in and, we'll build the hospitals and wells, and it doesn't matter what you are. But with them, but people convert so that they can get good to hospitalization, they can drink from the wells and those kind of things. So that's all part of zakat. And then Sawm. Sawm is the fasting during Ramadan, right? And the fasting during Ramadan, most people think they're fasting for 30 days. They're not. They're fasting during the day, and then they can eat it, in the night hours. But you're not allowed to drink and you're not allowed to eat during the day. And this is the 30-day trip that it took for Muhammad to travel from Mecca to Medina. All right. So he grew up in Mecca, started his religion teaching of monotheism in Mecca, which was the center of the Kabbalah, with the black stones and which were gods, and so Saudi Arabia was a polytheistic religion, and Muhammad starts teaching that, and he gets very few converts, and they eventually threaten his life, so he has to flee. He goes from Mecca to Medina, which is where the rest of his family was. So that the Ramadan is that 30 days of this trip that he took, and how long it took him there. And it's to remind them of the suffering that he endured in order that he might continue to teach his religion. And then there's the Hajj, which is making the pilgrimage to the Kaaba, which is Mecca. All right. So he goes to Medina. He becomes, an accepted teacher in Medina. He then there's another tribe that is coming against the tribe in Medina. He leads the Medina tribe. The other tribe is a bigger tribe. He leads it, says, if you follow my teachings, we'll have victory. They have victory. They conquer that other tribe, convert that other tribe, and that's how they expanded out till he could eventually go back to Mecca and conquer Mecca, which was, the big deal. And so Mecca is now the center of Islam. So that's Islam. There's a whole lot more to learn about Islam, but the bottom line, is that Jesus is only a prophet. He's the greatest of the prophets besides Muhammad, but he's only a prophet. He's not the Son of God. So the only other two, and we'll touch on those next week with a few other things, is Judaism and Confucianism. We'll talk about that next time. Father, thank you for this opportunity for us to recognize that there are a lot of competing worldviews. But ultimately, as Peter pointed out a few minutes ago, ultimately they all kind of merge together. Not that they are the same, but that they ultimately these worldviews all end up in the same place. It all comes down to us improving ourselves and being a better person, whether it's Islam or whether it's Hinduism or Buddhism or any of the other religions of the world, where you have shown us that we cannot improve ourselves. And so we need the cleansing blood of Jesus Christ and the power of the Holy Spirit to change our lives. So guide us as we continue to understand why it is that we are Christians, and why Christianity is not just another religion. It's not just another philosophy, not just another way of life, but that through Jesus Christ we have the way, the truth, and the life. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.